to Yell, Fight, Sooie, college football from three friendly-ish rivals.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the third installment of Yell, Fight, Sooie, where you get to listen to a Texas Longhorn by the name of James Burr, a Texas A&M Aggie by the name of Andy Tom Chesson. That's close enough. And then Arkansas Razorbacks are represented by me, Scott McIntyre. And guys, how are we? How are we doing after week one? How you feeling?
I'll let Andy go first.
It was fine. It wasn't something that made me allay all my fears. Beating Sam Houston State 31-0. Shutout's always good against anybody. That's the positive. Like the offense to play a little bit more consistent, but I think there were a lot of good things to build on, and that's kind of where I am. But I'm full on battered Aggie syndrome right this minute about this weekend.
Battered Aggie syndrome.
Yes.
Okay. All
that should
right.
have been the name of the show.
I hope I get to experience some of that here in a few weeks when we play you. Jim, how about you guys? How you feeling?
It's funny. Of course, I wasn't able to watch the game live, just like I won't be able to watch Saturday live. So following on Gamecast can be both a better and a worse experience. I think that it started rough, it started inconsistent, and I think finished really strong. And I'm just really proud of how these guys did. Full of coaches, kids, and kids. They're just.
You hedging a bet there?
I'm actually really. I saw all the hate against Quinn Ewers, and then I looked up his stats, and I don't get it. But I think it was a good step in the right direction. And I said before, I wanted a no doubt score, and that's what we ended up getting. So,
yeah. So, what would you say? I mean, let's stick in that. Let's dig into your game a little bit first. Then, so what went right for your team on Saturday, and what would you say that went wrong or could be improved upon looking at the next week?
I think it was a sluggish start. Part of that is due to a rookie quarterback who, as we talked about on the show before, hadn't thrown a meaningful pass in like a year and a half or something, maybe longer than that.
2 years.
What I loved was how explosive the defense was right away. I mean, they think the sack on the first defensive possession, special teams looked good with a blocked punt that was returned for a touchdown. So special teams and defense are the two biggest question marks on this team. I think everybody knows the offense will score because that's what they have, the skill players to do it. But seeing a good defense and special teams effort absolutely gave me some positive vibes.
Very nice. Andy, for you, what went right? What went wrong?
We showed aggressive offense. So I think that's the big positive thing. We had 2 pass plays of over 60 yards, which is the first time in probably 2 decades that we've thrown passes that long in a game. The defense was lights out like we were expecting it to be. And we played a lot of young guys. We played something like 19 true freshmen, another 9 redshirt freshmen on Saturday. And that was in actual meaningful game time. That wasn't in garbage time at the end. What went wrong was the 3-hour rain delay. Only 15 minutes of which actually had rain. It was lightning within 8 miles of the field. And every time, for those of you that don't know, every time lightning strikes somewhere within 8 miles of your playing surface, according to NCAA, it's a 30-minute clock. And every time lightning strikes again, it starts that clock over. So I think there were fits and starts. I think Jimbo Fisher said they were expecting to go out on the field and warm up at least 4 times. That's got to wear you down. The other thing that went bad is that we did not present any kind of rushing offense against Sam Houston. Now, I will say this, and I am not trying to sugarcoat what Sam Houston is. They are a team transitioning to Division I, but they are also a team that has won like 22 of their last 24 games, or I guess last 25 games. They're probably the best FCS team that you could hope to play right now, probably outside of maybe North Dakota, if they're still any good.
So the Dakotas, I think it's safe to say that Sam Houston State's like cream of the crop, right? We're talking national runner-ups. They're not a pushover.
Exactly. So it's positives are we got a shutout. Defense played really well. We showed some aggression on offense that we hadn't seen in a couple of years. Downside is we need to run the ball better.
Gotcha.
And avoid lightning.
And I also think, Jim was talking about the definitive score that Texas was able to come out with, but also, if you look at ULM and projections, that's a team that's probably going to be bowl eligible too. Take that for what it's worth when 89,000 teams get into bowls, but still, I mean, It's not no. I mean, it's not like everybody was playing Poor Sisters of the directional Oklahoma school this week. I mean, everybody
Chad Henniger's alma mater.
I love that place. It's so much fun. Well, let me ask you this. So for me, on Saturday when Arkansas defeated Cincinnati, and by the way, all the fun Cincinnati fans on Twitter that say, "Oh, well, good luck the rest of the year because you're going to have a tough year. We're going to win the rest of our games." Yeah, guys, that's what happens when you play in the SEC, right? And you guys shouldn't have beat us, and it's like, how I just don't understand how a team is beaten by another team. They said, "Man, we know we're better than you, and you beat us, and you'll see the rest of the year." It's like, okay, right. So if we're that much crap and we beat you, what does that make you?
This is the logic of sports fans, Scott, that I've been trying to figure out because I try to look at things like logically and analytically. And, to poke fun at Andy's, he's not even a Texans fan, so I won't poke fun at him. But the concept that Texans fans will make fun of me for not having won a playoff game in 20 years or won a Super Bowl in 20 years. And I'm like, 5 is better than never. So, like, it's math. It doesn't matter. Like, I don't know. That thing has bugged me about sports fans since it should be the one thing in life that we can – that's black and white.
This statement's going to bug you about sports fans too. Cincinnati has fans on Twitter.
I know.
That's Western Kentucky let them use the internet this weekend.
So this is what I think the case is with that, Andy. I think it's an old money versus new money. Each of our programs are in country clubs, if you will, conferences that are blue blood country clubs, right? It's not like we're joining up at Joe's all you can eat barbecue and golf course 9-hole mini golf club. We're in the SEC and the Big 12, and there's a Power 5. And I think Cincinnati's kind of like the new money. I liken them to the Rodney Dangerfield in Caddyshack that just showed up and they don't know how to act. Like, hey, everybody, yeah, good luck beating us. Yeah,
if only they were half as entertaining as Rodney.
Way to go, Arkansas. No, yeah, but the hog is good on you. I mean, that's really what it felt like to me. But so I walked out of I digress. I come back to the point. I left out of there Saturday thinking, this is a great win, and I'm pissed off, and and we stuck it to them, and they were in BCS last year. And then as the week's gone on, I've looked back and said, wow, we made a lot of mistakes, of them for week one, and really got away with it. How about you guys? How did you feel Saturday about your team coming out of your wins versus how you feel right now? Is it better? Is it about the same? Where you at? Andy, I'll start with you.
It's a really weird situation because that 3-hour rain delay took a lot of wind out of my sails. Yeah. And I did sit around and caught most of the second half, but literally I left, went to the grocery store, did my grocery shopping, started laundry. I lead a very exciting life as a 51-year-old. Came back and then, hey, I guess we're going to start playing again. So it was like watching a scrimmage. There was not a whole lot of emotion involved. So today I'm probably more okay with it than I was then, but I just became so distracted in the middle of that rain delay. Beyond that, I believe that we're going to run the ball. I think if you look at Jimbo Fisher and his offenses, they have always been able to establish the run. I think we have a new wrinkle for teams to worry about, at least new for us, in a vertical passing game that we haven't been able to have. And one of the myths about the Jimbo Fisher offense, because if you really get down to it, Steve Sarkisian runs the same offense that Jimbo Fisher does. There's variations, absolutely, but it's not the antiquated system that some of our recruiting rivals would have you believe. We just haven't had a quarterback who could complete passes downfield on a consistent basis, or we haven't had wide receivers who had the speed to separate. We have both those things now. So I come out, pitching a shutout is a huge deal no matter who you're playing. And we did it, and we did it fairly easily. I think they only had one chance within our 20-yard line or the entire game, and we ended up with an interception on that play. Beyond that, they had, 29 yards of rushing. Holding anybody to 29 yards of rushing is a big deal. Pass completion was ridiculous, and our defense is just going to get better. I'm concerned about our offensive linemen from a health perspective, and that's where my hesitation is. And then you add battered Aggie syndrome on top of that. This feels like a horrible trap game coming into this weekend, and it shouldn't be. We should beat App State. App State is a solid team, and of course, everybody knows what they did last weekend against probably not a great North Carolina team, but still they were there.
But I want to dig into this in a minute. I want to dig into App State in just a minute.
But right now, I'm feeling happier than I was at the end of 7 hours of football on last Saturday.
It really, I mean, I've watched Arkansas games where we had to go through 2 lengthy rain delays. You're right. It absolutely kills momentum.
On the plus side, we did not try to order pizza for our players during the rain delay, a la Tom Herman.
That oof. Not a good idea. Retrospect, rearview mirror. Yeah, I will say I agree with you. When I think of A&M, I think of your big, gigantic receivers, those 6'5" guys that can go up and get the ball in the end zone. I don't think about vertical speed. So I do agree with you. That's a change. Now I want to turn back over to Jim about how you felt Saturday versus how you felt now, because in between there was a comment made by Steve Sarkisian. They said that win against ULM was not important whatsoever to meet team goals for the year. So I'm curious not only how you felt Saturday versus now, but also in between there. What do you think Sark said versus what he tried to say? Where are you at with that?
I didn't actually hear that quote. I heard the one when he was asked about how big Alabama was, and he said that game doesn't matter.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes.
And I feel like it's such a no one has actually let either Longhorn fan or Longhorn player, I think, actually reflect on Saturday's game, because everybody's talking about this enormous game coming on Saturday. And look, it's a big game, but if you're honest and you take a step backward and you realize where Texas is as a program right now, that game actually has nothing to do with goals for the season. Texas does not consider itself a national championship contender. There have been games that Texas has played early in the preseason that matter. I go back to 2006 Texas versus OSU, Colt McCoy. They were still considered a national championship contender. They lost that game, and I think it did affect the rest of the season. This isn't that. And it's been a little frustrating because there really can be no honest reflection or assessment on the game, because we have to focus on what's going to happen. To me, I feel like Texas has nothing to lose on Saturday and everything to gain. But if they get blown out, it's what people expect. If they play tight, if they play close, people will find positives. And if, God forbid, Alabama stubs their toe, well, then we're going to play that Sam Ellinger clip from Georgia again. So I don't know, man. It's been a very frustrating, weird post-game reaction.
Yeah, week 1 to week 2 is really when you see the biggest changes among teams, but it's also whenever some realistic expectations start setting in for fans, or unrealistic expectations depending on how game 1 goes for people. So, and I would think they're in the hotbed of football in Texas that you guys must just really be. Each team must really be feeling, a fan base that's either like, we're going to beat Bama and win the national championship. Here we go. Or, oh God, here it goes again. So with that said, what's the general consensus on how you guys are going to do this weekend, Jim, against the mighty Nick Saban-led Bama Crimson Tide? And then what's your thought? How do you think it's going to go? I mean, and I'm curious. I also want to hear this from Andy. I'm kind of wanting to know everybody's thoughts on what everybody else's team is going to do this weekend as well. But, you're the marquee matchup of the group here. Let's be honest. So let's start with you and Bama.
Yeah. And what's kind of interesting is I'm teaching a sports broadcasting class. And so there are Aggie fans and there are Longhorn fans. And I think most people are preparing for the worst. I think they're preparing to be destroyed. I don't know of very many people that wear burnt orange are expecting a win. I think that most of us think this whole concept that our season begins or ends on Saturday is silly, because what are you going to do for the next 12 weeks if that's the case, or whatever? My sort of expectation is I feel like the game will be close for the first half. I believe that ones-on-ones the distance between Alabama and Texas is not that big. The problem is depth. And I think by the time we get into the third and fourth quarter, we've all watched football our lives. We all know that those running backs that get 2 yards a carry in quarter one, or if you stay with the run, are ripping off 5 or 6, 7 yards in the fourth quarter. I can see that happen. I can see separation at half. I think they'll keep it within the spread because it's a 20-point spread. So I think that's where I'm at. And, I might feel differently about an Alabama-Texas matchup 3 or 4 years from now. And I hope I do.
Yeah.
But this is all I'm hoping for is that we see marked improvement against what is probably Alabama's best team of this era.
Yeah. I know the feeling because as Arkansas would take the field being led by Chad Morris against Alabama, I almost felt like he's leading a band of half a dozen Christians against 500 Lions. Been there. It's not a great feeling. But so let me ask you, Jim, before I bounce over to Andy, what do you think happens with this guy and his team in App State this weekend? What do you think happens with Andy?
No, I think this A&M team is so different. I think you saw a lot of what made it's so funny because I feel like we saw a lot of what makes the A&M team work was very similar to the A&M baseball team this year. I do see them adapting to previous week's issues. I think that they are they have much more intestinal fortitude than maybe some Aggie teams we've seen. And I'm really mostly going back to like Big 12 days when they would roll in sometimes with a really good record and then fall apart the minute it went bad for them. Yeah. I feel like that's not the case this time. I do think they have a legitimate coach in Jimbo Fisher. I think at some point the talent wins out. And so I think I don't think they'll be looking back at all at App State. I think it'll be ugly for Appalachian State.
Andy, I'll use that as a transition over to you. I mean, App State, like you pointed out, they faced a North Carolina team that had a real neat deal going on. Didn't work out too well.
I love that.
I'll also say that Appalachian State has traditionally been they're the cream of the Sun Belt crop. Take that for whatever you will.
They have won 80 games in the last 8 seasons.
And when you think of the big upset in the big house in Michigan, they were the 1AA team at the time.
That was 15 years ago.
It was, but that was really the big upset.
And that has kept them on the map for 15 years, to be very honest with you.
That is my point.
That is one of the things that shows like Game Day hope is going to happen. They've got that to talk about every weekend. Realistically, I think it's going to be less comfortable than any A&M fan wants it to be, but that might be a 42-21 or a 54-28 kind of game. We are going to out-talent them. We are better coached than they are. And I don't want to sound that arrogant because they are certainly a team that is capable of putting up points. As you saw Saturday, they put up 40 points in the fourth quarter. But North Carolina might as well have been a turnstile the way they were stopping anything in the second half.
For anybody that didn't watch the fourth quarter of that game, it was insane. Really, the last few minutes of Appalachian State and UNC, it was a pinball bouncing back and forth down to each end of the field.
Well, it was one of those crazy games. UNC ended up with like 567 yards of offense, which is one of the reasons A&M is going to win. We have a better offense than UNC, and they couldn't stop UNC. Right. But App State had 649 yards against supposedly a decent UNC team. I think the jury's out on that. It's one of the interesting things about week 1 games because there is every one of us, I think, at times can fall into the trap of historically this is what we are. So if we win this game or don't win this game or don't win it by enough or win it by too much or whatever that is, we like to forward project on the rest of the season. We do that to the other teams we kind of pay attention to as well. We're doing it with App State right now because, again, 15 years ago, they upset Michigan in Michigan, and that was the story.
I can't believe it was 15 years ago.
But, I mean, it was. It's not like it happened last week, and it's not like anybody involved with the App State program now had anything to do with that program 15 years ago.
Right. They're coaching out.
Well, to that end too, Texas is 7-1 against Alabama all time. So
what is the love about all-time records? And I get it. And I know that I'm on the short end of both all-time records with both of you, not quite so much with you, Scott. We caught up over the last decade. But
You're the
does
ninth
it really
out of nine.
matter what happened from 1909 to 1955? I mean,
but I think it goes back to the thing Scott brought earlier, though. Like I understand the Texas Longhorns championship was now almost 20 years ago, but when I hear like I've told you about some of my Aggie fan students who are trying to go at me, well, it's still better than whatever your most recent national championship
Sure.
was. So close your mouth.
But a championship pedigree has nothing to do with the current season results. I mean, that it just doesn't, unless
Right.
it was the season before.
You say that, but if you look at the championship pedigrees, whenever we deal with college football, there are blue bloods. I mean, it is
Sure.
that it's Ohio State and
Michigan
Texas,
and Notre Dame and USC
Notre Dame.
and in some circles Texas and Alabama, which we did not mention. No, and I said some circles Texas because all-time wins 100%. National championships not so much. And ultimately, do I care that you have 1,000 wins? Sure, that's nice. Do I care that Alabama has 8, 9, 10 national championships and Ohio State has however many and Alabama or Notre Dame has as many? I mean, you're on the tail end of that spectrum so I think we can have a whole show about blue bloods when it comes to what the criteria are. Texas can make an argument, but I think they're on that border. And depending on how a season goes, you're here or there. Because
I just don't think national championships mattered that much until 20 years ago, frankly.
Well, they were made up, right?
You could have 4 or 5 national championships in the same year. I mean, up into the 90s when you had AP polls and UPI polls and all of that. I would liken Texas a situation where Michigan was about 10 years ago. It's a good team, goes the wrong direction, but it's all still there, right? All of the ingredients are still there.
I'm going to start bringing a vodka, and every time there's subtle digs against the Longhorns, I'm going to take a shot.
See, I'm not taking the shot because I look at what Harbaugh has done with Michigan, and I think, like Texas fans think, that Sarkisian could do the exact same thing with this team. Not Sark, another coach.
But I think Michigan's a great parallel for Texas, and I know that's not what we're doing on this show, but literally.
But it is right now.
I can sit here from my perspective and go, how has Texas wandered in the wilderness for the last decade? With the resources they have, with the recruiting classes that they still pull in, maybe they're not constructed really well all the time, but everything's in front of you, and Charlie Strong happens. And then Tom Herman happens. And then Sarkisian comes in and goes 5-7 in his first season. Sure, he's got some runway to fix some things. But how does that happen to a team with all those resources? And
the Charlie Strong thing is actually very easy to describe because he's the 5th choice. And
sure.
But yeah, that's and I like Charlie, but as a person, but yeah.
Well, I will tell you this. One of the things that's going to benefit Texas that nobody's really talking about when you move to the SEC is you're going to lose the Longhorn Network. And that means the coaches are no longer beholden to produce content for those networks. Yeah. Because when the Charlie Strong search happened, and I'm just calling it that because you can call it the Mike Saban search or the Nick Saban search if you want to. That was one of the things you started hearing about. Coaches didn't want to have to deal with their life on camera.
Yeah, definitely.
Mac even said when it was live for the first time this is a lot of work. This is a lot more than I really want to share with the public.
Well, yeah, we could do a whole episode on the Longhorn Network, how it was great in idea and what was promised and not so great in execution, though it still paid the university a metric fuck ton of money. But yeah, it definitely did all those things that you're describing. I mean, I think the head coaches at one point were doing 3 shows a week.
Yeah. So whether Sarkisian works out or not, him or the next coach isn't going to have that on them. And I think that opens you up to a different class of coach.
Well, let me reel this back really quickly. But Jim, let me throw this at you. We're looking at the upcoming week. We're not going to go. We will dive. We can dive into the history of our programs on another episode at some other point in time, and Jim can dissect for us in a laundry list format of all the things that have gone wrong at Texas and how those things are going to get resolved. I do think things get resolved in time. Everybody forgets the David Shula time at Alabama, the Ray Perkins time at Alabama, but between Gene Stallings and now Nick Saban, they're doing just fine. But Bama was also lost in the wilderness for a decade or so. Let's not forget that. So
college football is remarkably cyclical.
Yes, as we come into this week, who's the player or the players on your team that that could cause Alabama problems, that could cause will cause App State problems? Well, what do you look for? Who's the guy? Is there a guy? Is there a key that you're looking for coming up on this week? And I can start that. I'll say for Arkansas, for me, whereas last week I thought KJ Jefferson was the answer, I think this week it's going to be really interesting to see what Rocket Sanders is able to do out of the backfield, because historically South Carolina has some tackling problems at the line of scrimmage, and I'm hoping we can expose that. That's me. That's where we're at. How about you guys?
Well, I'd like to ask you a question because we haven't really talked about Arkansas, South Carolina much. How much does Catalon and I guess your other safeties hurt a little bit too and may not be available?
Well, sure. Yeah.
How much does that affect your game plan facing the myth of Spencer Rattler? Because Spencer Rattler's never been the player he's supposed to be.
Yeah, the worst thing Texas could do against OU was knocking him out of the game and then bringing in the other dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was watching on SEC Nation last week, and they're putting Spencer Rattler like the number 2 quarterback in the SEC or something. I go, huh? It's some pundits were. For me, I think the loss of Jalen Catalon in the secondary, the potential loss of Miles Slusher back there as well, is huge. Slusher was having a great game against Cincinnati, and Jalen Catalon just absolutely brings the heat. We're accustomed to being without Catalon because we were without him at the back end last year. Look, guys, he is an old school Steve Atwater, Ronnie Lott type of player. He delivers a hammer when he hits people. Unfortunately, that means that your body takes a toll. A toll is taken on your body as well, and that's what happens with that guy. I think when you lose a player in game early, it's hard to adjust, right? When you've had all week to know he's not there, you have a lot more time to get guys prepped. And I do believe, as every coach I've ever heard has said, the most improvement in a team is shown between game 1 and game 2. Unfortunately, this is also between South Carolina's game 1 and game 2, so they'll probably be a little bit better. And Shane Beamer is a heck of a coach at South Carolina, and turning them around. But if we can get a pass rush on Spencer Rattler, I think we will rattle him.
And I was gonna go there.
It's too you can too. It's too easy. Everybody can do it.
Yeah,
it's just that much fun. But no. So then let me kick that question though back out there, guys. Jim, since Andy didn't want to answer it, let me throw it to you. Who's your guy?
Well, I'm gonna cheat and go with a group of guys, and it's the biggest cliche in football. But if the offensive line can mature and play well, Texas has the skill positions, I think, to beat Alabama. Like, I think Quinn Ewers showed enough at the end of that game. We know Xavier Worthy can catch. The tight ends will be more involved. But for the most part, the talented offensive linemen on Texas are also the youngest offensive linemen on Texas. And I really think that the Alabama defense will be super duper disruptive. Again, maybe not the beginning of the game, but toward the end. So I think that's the biggest question mark right now, is whether Texas can hold up on the offensive line. And then obviously the secondary is non-existent. So hopefully that, or used to be. I don't know. I don't know how they are now, but hopefully they can block.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw, was reading some things. I guess there was some sort of joint Bama Texas fan post somewhere on the internet, and they were talking back and forth and playing nice. And somebody was contending that Kelvin Banks, the freshman 5-star left tackle you guys have at Texas, A&M really wanted him. Great head-to-head win for Texas to get him. Could shut down Will Anderson, who is going to be the number 1 draft pick in the NFL draft. Let's just say that happens. Bama fan comes back and says, what if we put Will Anderson on your right tackle? And I said, we may be seeing Hudson Card. So,
yeah. God, don't say that.
I think that's the nail on the head for that game, for Texas to have any hope of winning the game is that the offensive line is going to have to play out of their minds. And I just don't know that you have the horses yet. I think you've got two good pieces, but if Christian Johnson is still your right tackle.
Yeah, 100% concur. I think that's the space we're living in, and we all know that it's really easy to get good skill position players. It's hard to get a good, consistent offensive line or defensive line for that matter.
And to create that depth, I agree with you guys. I think the O-line play will determine how Texas does in the game, and the ability to control emotions. Right, playing Bama at home, it's a huge thing. These guys, we're talking about 20-year-old guys, right? And they're going to have to control those emotions and not get too high early because Alabama's going to come out swinging. They always do. But if you can withstand their first round or two of punches, you got a chance holding on to that thing. So, Andy, who are you looking at?
But hey, before we get to Andy, and as we close out the Longhorn talks, I know we only have about 5 or 6 minutes left. I do want to do 2 shout-outs. One, happy 23rd anniversary to my favorite Longhorn fan. I fell in love with her watching a Longhorn game, and somebody blew up the linebacker, and she said, finish that fucking tackle. And I looked at her and went, yeah. Also, guys, if Colt McCoy doesn't get hurt, they beat Alabama in the national championship in 2010. Sorry, Andy. Now back to you.
Andy, there you go. So
I have love for my cousin Jim, so I'm just going to let him have that.
I don't think you have a choice at this point. I think you kind of you got to let him have that. I mean,
the thing is, literally every Texas fan believes this to be a thing.
Well,
it's not even a question of it would have been a closer game or a different game. It just nope. Colt McCoy would have won the game for them, and they are allowed to believe that.
Might be true, might not. An alternate universe, we might be able to find out about that. So, okay, since we do only have 5 or 6 minutes, and Andy doesn't want to answer this question to save his life with me, let me kick it over to something else. I keep asking you who. You don't want to give me a name. That's fine.
Our offensive line needs to play better. They need to play consistently, and they just need more reps together with the group that's out there right now. We're missing our All-American center. He's got mono. Mono sucks. And depending on where it was when he originally was diagnosed with it, he may be back for Miami, maybe back for Arkansas. We don't know. But even then, he hasn't been able to practice. And he's a track guy, so he didn't practice in the spring. So there's going to be a ramp-up time for him. So in the meantime, the other 5 guys that we are going to run out there need to start playing well together. And I would expect that you're going to see a concentrated effort to run the ball from a number of reasons, but mostly because we need work at it before we play Miami next week. And this is not a looking ahead to Miami sort of thing. This is just more of these games, you schedule these types of games to work on certain aspects.
These are preseason games
of your program. They are. And I don't want to treat them like that. And every A&M fan remembers when I think Miami beats A&M and Coach Fran said, well, exhibition season is over. Well, fuck you, Fran. That's why you don't have a job anymore. Couldn't even coach Texas State.
We should have an episode of this show where we just talk about like the 3 worst coaches in school history for each one of us and just vent. We should do that at some point in time. But Andy, I do wish your center and the associated yell leader that gave
Bryce
it to
Foster
him a speedy recovery. So sorry, 2-3 minutes left here, guys. We're going to a 12-team playoff. It could be as early as 2024. It could be as late as 2026. What's your feelings on this? There's a lot of mixed feelings that I'm hearing from people. Some people love it. Some people hate it. Me personally, I think it mirrors up with every other sport the NCAA governs, even football, just at lower levels. So I don't think it's that big of a deal, but that's me. What do you guys think?
I mean, I'm fine with it. I probably would have preferred 16 because I don't like buys in football. And they throw rhythm off, and it makes more teams rife for upset. I don't love auto bids, and I know that we have a disagreement perhaps among the 3 of us on this. I don't think you can legitimately say the top 6 ranked conference champions are the same type of teams, because the conferences you're talking about are the SEC, the Big 10, Big 12, ACC, Pac-10, and now there's a 6 that has to come from somewhere out of that group of 5. And all that's going to get realigned. But the reality is that 16 doesn't deserve a top 6 seed or an auto bid. If they're in the top 12, just go with the top 12. Why is that so hard?
But getting the auto bid doesn't mean they get a bye. That just means they get put in the seat of 12 somewhere or another.
It does, but I'm saying the math has to work out for me. I don't want to see a situation where USC is a 6-5 team, or excuse me, let me do the math because Aggie. They're an 8-4 team. They win the conference, and that's a very viable scenario. But if they're one of the top 6 conferences, they now have an auto bid into the playoffs, and that an 8-4 team is not a playoff team to me.
Okay, well, I think
so that's
we have that in other sports.
I mean, agreed, and I'll get over it. It's just that's my initial issue. The thing I love about the auto bid situation is because they named conferences. Notre Dame will never be one of the top 4 seeds. It just can't happen because they're not in a conference
yet.
They can make the playoffs, but they're going to have to swallow a lot of institutional pride to join one of those conferences.
Yeah, I think I think an 8-4. I think the goal of that with the top 6 is to make sure that some team like from the Sun Belt or the AAC or something like that gets included.
Cincinnati last year, great example. They deserve to be in the playoffs. U of H might be a team. Did they lose this last weekend, or they barely?
They won. It was close.
But they're
a team that people are talking about going undefeated this year. If they go undefeated and they're ranked in the top 10, I've got no problem with it. It's that I'm at 25, but I'm one of the top 6 conference champions that's a thing that could happen, and that concerns me.
Yeah. Jim, 12 teams?
Football is for entertainment, and they want to make money. So for me, USC at 8-4 will get in because, well, that's a lot of TVs. I also sort of get bored seeing the same teams. If I've already seen LSU and Alabama play each other and Alabama won, I don't really need to see part 2 of that. In fact, I don't watch part 2 of that when it happens. So I'm okay with it. I'm actually becoming more and more disillusioned with the playoff, but I think I like 12 teams better than 4 or 8 or whatever it was.
4.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. 12's better than 4, and in my opinion, it gives the little guys an opportunity to make a run. But guys, I think we're just about out of time. So any parting shots? Any one-liners? Let me give you this. Let's do this instead. Give me one word that all A&M fans or all Texas fans or all Arkansas fans should think of this week, depending on your team. What's the one word that you want to hold on to going into this week?
I quote Mr. T in Rocky 3, pain.
Nice. Andy?
Survival.
And I would leave it with Rattler. It's killing. Anyway, this is Yell Fight Sooie. That's James Christopher. That's Andy Tom Chesson. I'm Scott McIntyre. I am still Scott McIntyre. We hope you enjoyed episode 3. Episode 4 comes next week. Bye, everybody.
Yell Fight Sooie is part of the Let's Get To network. Yell Fight Sooie is produced by Twitchy Dolphin Media.